And welcome back to Game Escape. Today we're going to be taking a look at Super Mario 64, truly one of the greatest video games ever released. There's not that much that I can say about it that hasn't already been said. It has been reviewed numerous times, it has been getting heaps and heaps of praise for about 17 years now, and not much more can be added to the discussion. What I hope to do today is look at Super Mario 64 in its status as a release game for the Nintendo 64 back in September of 1996. This past week we've had the announcement of the Xbox One, the new console generation is about to launch, and I thought it was time to really go back and take a look at the magic of Super Mario 64 as a release game. In order to do that, I think you have to understand what the hardware marketplace was like prior to the release of the N64. So I've posted 2 pages from the 1994 EGM Video Game Buyer's Guide. And what you see here is a market that is a little confused. You have the mainstay consoles like the Super NES and the Sega Genesis, along with a host of other systems that entered the marketplace promising a quote-unquote next-generation experience. You've got the Turbo Duo, the Neo Geo, the 3DO, the Atari Jaguar, even the Amiga CD, the Pioneer Laseractive, and the Philips CDI. And the next generation, for most of these consoles, was delivering a lot of multimedia content. You think of the ill-fated FMV video game craze of the early 90s. And as a player at this time, I, and a lot of people that I knew, were not really convinced that this was truly the next generation. If I think back to my own opinions as a pretty avid gamer at the time, I and a lot of my friends, we were waiting for the next great thing to come from Nintendo and Sega. That was the hope. And so most people that I knew, we held our money. We weren't going to go after something like the 3DO, which was insanely expensive. As was the Neo Geo, it was you were kind of in a holding pattern. You went back to the Super NES, you went back to the Sega Genesis, and you waited. And then 1995 rolled around, and the next generation was here. You had the surprise launch of the Sega Saturn in May of 1995. September of 1995, you had the PlayStation. And it was an interesting time. At that point, I and a lot of the people that I knew said, okay, well, now, finally, the imposters are gone. We finally have systems from Sega, and we've got this newcomer in the PlayStation that looks pretty interesting. But I think the reaction was, those early launch titles for the Saturn, for the PlayStation, they didn't move enough away from the disappointments of those interim next-gen systems. And we heard the announcements of the Ultra 64. The great new system from Nintendo was on the horizon. And at that time, Super Nintendo was, in my mind, the most incredible system ever released. You had tons and tons of great platformers, tons and tons of great RPGs. Nintendo, really didn't seem like they could do wrong, and the idea that they were cultivating this terrific machine that was graphically superior to the Saturn and to the PlayStation made me want to wait. And so for me, the wait was on. I didn't have the money to purchase a Saturn, a PS1, and this new great system from Nintendo. I had to choose, and so that really meant another year of waiting and another year of having really the same gaming experience that I've been having since the early 90s. And I think it was really that way for a lot of my friends, a lot of people that I grew up with. you could only buy one, and you had to wait for Nintendo. So from the fall of 1995 to the fall of 1996, we were going back to the classics. We were going back to the great NES platformers. We were going back to the great SNES platformers, and of course a lot of the RPGs that were coming out for the SNES up until that time. And so to understand Mario 64 is to understand what these games offered and the kinds of experiences that you were having up to that point with the 8-bit and 16-bit consoles. And as great as they were, by 1995, they felt a little stale because you had seen some of the promise of 3D. I didn't find the PS1 and the Saturn launch titles to be that exciting, as I said, but you know, you had Virtua Fighter, you had Battle Arena Toshinden. You knew that consoles were capable of a different graphical experience. So even though we were holding out for the N64, we still wanted to have a next-gen experience, and I think ultimately we were getting a little tired of the same type of game. So you can imagine our surprise and delight and our awe when we turned on that N64 for the first time and saw the gorgeous opening sequence, to see Princess Peach's castle in 3D and have that fly around. I mean, it was truly incredible. Now, I didn't get one at launch. A friend of mine picked it up, I believe, maybe at Christmas, or got it as a Christmas gift, and invited me over. Now, I had seen clips of the game, I had read about it in the magazines, and I believe Best Buy used to have a display, but at that point I only saw the first battle with Koopa. So just to have the controller in my hands, to be able to play this after that long wait, was truly amazing. I can't describe how cool it was to walk into that castle for the first time after essentially my whole life having played Mario games on that 2D obstacle course. To just see it in this way was truly breathtaking. Today it doesn't seem like much. I think it's aged well compared to other N64 games, but people might find it a little silly, well, when I talk about how shocked and amazed I was by this, but years and years of 2D platformers left a certain expectation for what a video game could be, and that first level in Super Mario 64 totally changed what I believed a video game could accomplish. Another kind of amusing aspect of the experience for me was the fact that I was a little surprised and strangely nervous by the control scheme. I had never played on an analog stick before, and it came across as a little bit unwieldy. I mean, I was so used to playing with Mario on the D-pad, and then to have the ability to control him in the 360-degree setting and to use those C buttons to manipulate the camera, it was a lot to take in on my first playthrough. And I remember thinking, wow, this is totally different and a little difficult. And as you battled some of the early bosses, which all of which forced you to really master the analog stick. I mean, today it's child's play, but back then it was challenging and really, really unique. And just to see Mario punch and kick and to have that triple jump functionality, it was just so much to take in that I was a little overwhelmed, and at first a little, I won't say sad, but just a tad melancholy that I felt like the industry had moved so far beyond what I had been playing. I was a little nervous as to whether I could really adapt to all of this. So my coolest early memory of the game was Christmas '96. I had a sleepover at this friend's house who had the N64. And we were playing it all night, but he was kind of hogging the controller, and I eventually said, you know what, I'm tired, I'm going to bed. And I waited until about 1 in the morning when everyone in the house had gone to sleep. Just laid there in my sleeping bag, pretended to sleep, and just waited for him to go upstairs. Then I got up, turned on the TV, and I played this game all night. I probably played it from like 1 a.m. until about 7 or 8, non-stop, and I was completely absorbed by it, completely blown away, just trying to find every coin, every secret, marveling at the level of control that I had over Mario, and just walking around that castle was absolutely incredible. And at that moment I said, you know what, this is the next generation. This was a game that, in my opinion, back then, and even now, was so far beyond what the Saturn and the PlayStation were offering that I was just completely convinced that this was the future of gaming, and it was. I mean, it really was the first game to, I think, master a 3D environment. Now, you look back at it today, and of course the camera was so problematic and the controls were pretty finicky, but back then it was really a revelation. And I sort of posed the question to you guys out there, what games gave you that kind of reaction? And I believe this was really the only video game launch title for which I was just so captivated by every aspect of it. I really do believe that this is the greatest video game launch title of all time. It completely sold me on the Nintendo 64. I needed to have this system. It was even better than all the hype. And what other launch titles have done that? What other launch titles have there been that have made you think, wow, this is even better than I expected? I can't really think of any. We talked about the Saturn and the PS1 launch games not being totally impressive. I mean, you've got Super Mario World, which to me was more of a refinement of an already great formula. You might point to Halo on the original Xbox, which I thought was pretty impressive because it was the first time that a PC-style shooter was replicated convincingly on a home console. But really, I don't think there's much competition. This game, Super Mario 64, was just so amazing that nothing could compete with it at the time. It was completely revolutionary. It revolutionized the gaming industry, and I think it was actually the best game on the Nintendo 64, better than The Legend of Zelda, better than Donkey Kong. Nothing, in my opinion, that came out after it could compete with its level of sophistication, its sense of exploration, and its overall fun. So as we find ourselves on the dawn of the next console generation, where we're going to have a new batch of launch titles coming out, my question is, can the video game industry give us something this amazing? Can there be a launch title on these next series of consoles that is as revolutionary as Mario 64 was back in the day? Can Microsoft and Sony and the various publishers who are going to come out with the first batch of games give us something that makes us amazed by the console and becomes an instant must-buy? I'm actually kind of skeptical. I don't know if that's due to a lack of innovation on the part of today's video game industry, or are they just going to give us shooters and sports games? And of course, the Xbox reveal would lead you to believe that that is going to be a strong focus. But I think Mario 64 should serve as a provocation to these companies that if they come out with something truly innovative, it will give us an instant reason to purchase those consoles. Nothing that I have seen from a launch game has come remotely close to how amazing Super Mario 64 was. And I'm wondering, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that something on the PS4, the Xbox One will be this great, but I wonder if Mario 64 represents a seminal time in the history of gaming where such great innovation could be captured by a single game at a single moment.